what I wanted to do was create a set of scripts that would go together, and while I'm utilizing a file that's quite small, I tested this, and I will show you kind of the data on a much larger data set for your purposes. But I will admit, when we do send you the data, I just can't send you this particular one. But even though there's nothing really that personal in it, I just figure I'd rather not. And but with that said, the general ledger data that we have here just utilizes just a few different fields, and that's what this script will utilize. We have a journal entry number, an account number, a debit field, and a credit field. So that's all you need in order to run this test. And this script will run, I mean, for anybody. So if anyone wants to, not so much listen and learn, but really just run the script for themselves, you could do that after you watch what we're doing here today. But what I wanted to do prior to kind of running, the actual script itself, which we'll walk through it. What I wanted to do is kind of show you some of the dialog boxes and then walk through the results that I've already run through this test on again, 110,000 record file. So we took 110,000 records and we then ran this test, and it ran in about 10 minutes, to complete, but I didn't want to waste our time today watching it spin. And what I did was I didn't delete all of the files kind of building up into this final set of table. So then that way you're able to go back to each, you're going to be able to see each step of the way here as we go through this today. And then again, though, the data file that you can utilize is this general ledger table that only has 44 records in it, mind you, but it still will work for your purposes. So let me walk you through what I had done, and starting off with the starter script. My ultimate goal is ultimately to get to a file called unique all sequences. And it's a little, hopefully this will, something I can impart on your, or get the information across today. But one of the what you'll notice here is that for each journal entry listed here, maybe this is a better example to show you. For this, say, journal entry JE10708, it's on one line. There's a debit, and then there's these debit sequences that go out for, I believe we go out for 50. And then there's the credit sequence, 18926. And then that goes out for another 50. So what that is saying, based on what I'm looking at here, is that I have one account posting. It's in the debit, in the first position of the debit. So imagine, you'll see this entry in a second. The first position, we had 80901 as the account number. Then as I go over to the credit account position, there's 18926. And strangely enough, that's actually happening in two places, like there's two credits. So hopefully if I did this right, when I take a look at my journal entry, the journal detail, and let me just bear with me 1 second here. Yep. So 10708. Let me just make sure. I think I copied it, but I just want to make sure. So we'll go over to the journal detail. So just showing you some data management functions. I could kind of scroll down, or I can go to my data search and say locate if new journal entry number equals, and in quotes here I'm putting the JE10708, and sure enough it finds it. Now what we have here is two different, I guess we have the two credit postings and the two debit postings for this 10708. And when we summarize this table together, and this is kind of how we got these particular, to get to this particular answer. And you can kind of see here that this journal entry where you had a debit, I believe the debit of the debit of the 80911 and a credit of the 18926, this only happened once within the actual data set. So that this only happened once throughout the entire time frame of the data, which is really, in my opinion, interesting, and something to again to kind of note as we're going through this particular data set. And just going out here so we have kind of the debits there, and then the unique credits. When we look at the 107, I think it was 10708. Let me just here it is. So here's the 10708. We have the kind of the unique credits being listed for that particular account there as well. So we could filter through this as well just to show it to you. So this is ultimately what we're trying to get to in our data file. Okay, so this unique all sequences, kind of the end of the day, what we're trying to boil this up to. I've basically created two files prior to this, which is a unique credits and a unique debits. And what I find really interesting is in the whole journal detail table that we have, there's only really one instance, or a few instances of these credits. We have 110,000 records, yet the unique debits there's only about 125 of them that are happening, and the unique credits, there's only about 396 of them. So it's something where when you really look at kind of the sequence of the credit numbers happening and the debit numbers happening, that these things are happening in this type of fashion, and I find that really interesting. So again, it kind of boils down your data quite a bit pretty quickly. But let's kind of walk through what that function is doing and walk through each part of the script. And again, it's a very complex script, but something that hopefully you'll learn a lot of data management along the way. And one thing I wanted to also note is that we're not only using the data command, but we're also using the analyze commands as well. So we're going to utilize summarize and cross-tabulate. And while summarize and cross-tabulate are over here in the analyze feature, and I think we're even using duplicates, excuse me. What I find interesting is that in the, even though we're doing data manipulation today, we're still going to be utilizing these analyze features because it just, it's something where even though it's under the analyze command line or menu line, they're still very, very useful and something that totally relates to data management. Okay, so first off, it's going to ask you for what is your journal entry testing table, and then second off, what it's going to do is ask you what fields do you need. And again, I said you only need really 4 fields to run this particular test. It's then going to open up the input file, and it's going to summarize in a pre-sort fashion, mind you, on journal entry number and account number. And it's going to create this thing called a sorted file. So that's this sorted file right here. So again, we kind of have a sorted file here. Let me just go back, bear with me, go back to my starter. And then it's going to summarize on the journal entry number and to a file called the sum file. Now, I have to note that what we're doing here is only for the debit transactions. So the sorted file will, first off, will only have the debit transactions, and then it'll go through the summarize command, and then it's going to kind of loop around as long as you're working with this particular journal entry number. Now, because we've already done this, but we've done it for debits first, and then in my script, as you keep kind of going down, we do the same thing for the credits down below here. I'm actually going to kind of talk through the credit functionality first, because I think that is sort of like a better way of handling this for our analysis. Just keep in mind as we walk through this that we're actually essentially walking through the credit side of it, even though it's talking through kind of the debits here. Okay, so we're summarizing on the journal entry and the account number and accumulating these amount fields to a file called sorted. If, in this case, if the credit value is less than 0, then we're summarizing on the journal entry number to a file called sum file. So the sorted file, like I said, is something where we've summarized on the journal entry number and account number. And then the sum file is where it's just a raw summary of the journal entry numbers. And let's see how, why we're doing that. The reason we're doing that is by summarizing on the raw journal entry numbers, we can count that file and then say the record count, this variable field record count equals count 1. And then we can have, v count equals 1, so that we're going to basically, as we call this other script, we're again the count. So sorry, let me just go to the sum file here. We have 11,564 journal entries. So 11,564 is here in ACL's mind. And in this v count equal 1, that's kind of starting it off. Then it's going to jump to this new script called JE flat script debits, while the v count is less than, so v count right now is equal to 1, is less than the 11,564. So we have that kind of working. And so let's kind of go over to that. So we'll go over to this JE flat script debit table as a starting point. And at this point, what it's going to do is it's going to open up the summary file. Again, the summary file is the one that's just by journal entry number, and it's going to locate record number 1. And it's going to say the journal entry number, this variable, is equal to whatever journal entry number is here, which is JE1. So it's going to, basically copy that and save that as a variable. So again, the variable v underscore JE2 equals whatever is in that record number 1 in that field. So that's kind of the first step. It's going to open up the sorted file, which is the summary table on the journal entry and the account. And it's going to extract any information for that journal entry number and account, debits and credits, if the journal entry number equals, in this case, JE1. So that's basically this command right here. Then what it's going to do is it's going to create a sequence number for each one of those journal entries in that particular one. And I'm just, you know what, I deleted the file extracted, unfortunately. What it's going to do is for each journal entry, it's going to extract essentially all of the debit sequences for that journal entry. And it's going to create that file extracted, and unfortunately I deleted it, or it would be still here and we could take a look at it. But it's going to make a sequence number for each one of those entries, and maybe what I'll try to do is run this again and break it as we go. But I thought it was nice to have all these files to show you, so hold on one second, we'll keep going here. So again, imagine I'm going into this sorted file that we have by journal entry number and account, and we're extracting the journal entry, the account number, the debit, the credit, if the journal entry equals 1. And then we're creating a sequence number to find out, well, how many debit account sequences show up for that journal entry number. And then that's kind of the second thing that's happening down here in the sequence number. And then what it's doing is it's extracting all of those sequence numbers based on that, and it's appending it, mind you, if the record number is less than 50. So there can only be 50 sequences that are available here. And actually we can at least show you this journal entry account sequence debit here. So that, thank God we can show you that. And therefore you can kind of see, for journal entry 1, we had a debit. The debit account was 72,470, and this is the amount. Journal entry 10 was, say, we had 3 debits for that journal entry, which is 1, 2, and 3, and these are the accounts. Journal entry 100, it had 1, and you can kind of notice here how many have one sequence, how many have lots of sequences in it. But I stopped it at 50 for a reason, and as I go back to this actual script here, I just figured that when I'm doing all of this cross-tabbing, which we do down below here, as you'll see, all this cross-tabbing, that I didn't want this to go out for too far. I mean, I even asked ACL, what are the limits of the cross-tab feature? And I don't, they actually gave me an answer, and I may have it in our listing here, but it was so large. It was something like you could have a record of 33,000 out to the right there. So it really wasn't anything that I was ever hitting the limit on. And there really wasn't a limit on how many columns there could be, but I think it might have been 1,000 columns or something. But it's very rare that you would have that many in a journal entry. Basically, how many credit accounts would you be hitting? Would you hit more than 100, 1,000, 2,000 accounts in one journal entry listing? And the answer is usually not, but you might have like one journal entry a month that's like your payroll processing, and it might go out for 10,000 lines, for some crazy reason. So I just figured, let me kind of break it at 50. And again, this is where if you wanted to go out to 100 as opposed to 50, all you have to do is change it in that one place. And there, it shows up in another place later in the flat credit part, but for the most part, that's all we're doing. And this is going to create the debit sequences. Again, let me just kind of go back here. So imagine here we're having, just try to get one that has a lot of, see, it's interesting, there weren't a whole lot that when you looked at it, that there were a lot of postings. It was almost like they had a lot of, debits, but the debit, there weren't a lot of sequences to it. There weren't 20 accounts that they were posting to. And probably, again, I broke it at 50, but when you look through the data, there weren't that many that it was posting to more than, say, 5 or 6 at the most. And these are the 5 or 6 different accounts that it's posting to as it's going through its sequencing. Now, I did this and wanted to show you this in the scripting as we kind of go through each one of these points here, is to kind of turn this sorted file where you have journal entry numbers and accounts, which is kind of useful, but it's 32,000 rows, to then kind of say, well, let me kind of boil this down one step further and more or less summarize it by account and have the first 50 sequences. And again, it's still 32,000, but you could only look, let's say, at maybe the first, if you wanted to look at the first debit of every posting, that you could do that in this particular table. And I thought it was also nice to see how many postings there were per journal entry. It was kind of useful to, at least for me, to say, well, it's almost like as I classify on this sequence number, just to kind of, note this, how many did I have of 1? How many did I have of 2, of 3, of 4? And you'll notice there that there are very few that had more than, say, my gosh, more than 24 postings. It really kind of got down to a point where if you really looked at it, the top 10 postings would get you a lot of the uniqueness of that particular journal entry. And again, use this for whatever knowledge it provides you, but when you're looking at a journal entry file that is massive, I always like to kind of boil it down as best as I can. And this is one way of again, working with data in a way to kind of manage it and boil it down to kind of a different viewpoint. Okay, so let me just go back to my script here. So this particular script is going to kind of run through that sorted file, which is here, and it's going to kind of create that sequence number for each different type of journal entry and general ledger account number, and it's going to only do it for each, let's say each set of journal entries only up until it gets to 50 accounts, and at the 50 mark it's going to go to the next journal entry number and do that for 50, and then the next journal entry number and do that for 50. And as you see here, most of these journal entries only have 1 or 2 or 3 different accounts that it's posting to. So let me go back to my script. That is the reason why I'm doing this looping script, mind you, and why I'm kind of building that extraction. So once that extraction's built, the only thing that I have to do is say, well, my V count is now not 1, but it's 1 plus 1, which equals 2. And then it will then jump back to my original script, which is the starter script. And let me just kind of go down to that particular one, that step. And it's basically going to this statement going, okay, go back to the debit script while now 2 is less than 11,564. and then it goes back to the debit script, looks at the sum file, goes to JE10, which is record number 2, and it does the process again. And then it goes back to the starter script, goes to this item here, now it's 3, and it goes to the third item in there. And again, I don't want to bore you here, but that's kind of why we're using that looping script. I'm just going to close some of these to make it easier. So it's going to kind of loop through each one of these journal entries and ultimately create a table like we did here in journal entry account sequence debit that has every kind of debit sequence by the journal entry number with that particular general ledger account and the actual dollars that are in the debit range. Then does the same thing for the credits. So now the credits are all listed in this kind of fashion where all of the credits are now listed again in that particular range. So now you have a debit version and a credit version. Okay. So hopefully that made sense, and walking through that example, kind of helps in understanding it. So once it's done, and gone through the debit version of creating a debit file, it then does a similar thing and create the credit version of the credit file. So it's now, the debit version, the credit version, and that was down here. And once it's done with the credit version of the file, so it's going through the whole process here, it then is going to run this final JE flat script final. Now, I have to note this, and I just wanted to show you the set echo on. Okay, so I put set echo none up here. What's echo? Echo means that it won't write what I'm about to do from the echo none down to the echo on, which is way down here. Bear with me, it's way down here. So from echo none to echo on, it is not going to write to this log file all of the activity. And the reason it's not doing that is because I'm kind of jumping back and forth between the scripts. And again, it seems to be, to me at least, the only way that I can do this using ACL right now in building this file that has the 50 sequences by journal entry number. Because I have to do that, it has to go through it like 11,000 times, back and forth, and then it has to do it twice because it has to do the debits to one and the credits to another. So I now have 22,000 sequences of all these commands being processed, and your log file becomes massive. So if you set echo none, it turns that off, and then that way your log file isn't being hit. Now, you could argue, well, we kind of lost our audit trail then, and we don't have that in our data, in our log file, but these are the things that you sometimes have to give up, in my opinion. And then from that point forward, and by the way, you could comment out what I've done here so that it does create this massive log file. But what I found was that the log file was becoming, 20 times the size of my ACL document. It was starting to become a large file, and there was no value in there. It was very difficult to really see any value within these commands here. So, okay, once all that was done, I then set it back to on, and then I open up my final script. So here's kind of the final one. And in the final script, what I did was I then cross-tab, and this is, to me, again, trying to show you data management a bit, where we go from a sorted file, where it's kind of listed journal entry number account, journal entry number account. It's not as useful, to then journal entry account sequence debit, where you have a sequence number added. It's a little more useful. It's not totally useful. I mean, it's still getting there. It's kind of on its way to useful. And then we build this kind of cross-tab one, which I just need to check. Hopefully I kept it, which we call it the cross-sum credit and the cross-sum debit. So let's open cross-sum debit. Now we will have always 50 columns across. We will then have the debit account, the journal entry number, and then 50 columns across of, where in the sequence did that account number show up for that journal entry. So, 72,470 showed up in the first sequence for debit 1. Journal entry 10,000, 10130 showed up 1. Again, and it kind of goes through the sequencing. So again, something to take a look at, a little bit more useful in this capacity than to maybe look at your debit journal entries and looking at it in more of where in the sequence did that particular debit show up in the journal entry sequence. And again, it's a little easier because it's cross-tabbed to see that and make some sense of it. All right. And so what this script is doing is it's cross-tabbing the debits, it's cross-tabbing the credits, and then what I'm doing is I'm running a duplicate command on the debits to say so let's kind of go back to the debits here, for the sequence of debit account and where it's showing up in the sequence, how many duplicates of that do I have in my data? So could it be journal entry 1 and journal entry 10,000? Where is that showing up? And then that is, kind of the duplicate on that. And then I'm running it on the credits as part of a duplicates as well. Once I've done, my duplicates testing at that point, I'm joining it back to the original file that I had that crosstab, and I'm doing it in an unmatched fashion. So in essence, what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, where do I have instances where 61950 showed up in the first sequence of that account number? And also down below here, again, these would all be duplicates. You could see here for these journal entry numbers, we have 10130, and it's showing up in the first sequence every time. These are all duplicates. So these duplicates would show up on my duplicates file when I go to my duplicates file. And then if I join this cross-sum debits to the duplicates file in an unmatched fashion, mind you, it's going to show me the unique debits. So the ones that I have debit accounts that never showed up in the sequence of the first sequence. And then I do the same thing for my credit accounts, where again I look for the ones, so that's my unique debits, but mind you, where this 80911 showed up in the first sequence only once in that file. The unique credits 10130 showed up in all these kind of sequences 1 through 7, but that only happened once ever in the file. So again, I'm looking for what's unique in my data, and then I'm joining those two together and saying, if this is my unique debit journal entry file and this is my unique credit journal entry file, what is the uniqueness between both the debits and credits? So I join the debits and credits and get that unique all sequences file as the final. So that, again, a lot going on here. Something where we will be making a video of this particular webinar, and something that when you're going through your own data with the script, you may want to go back to each kind of step here. But again, I wanted to spend a good 30 or so minutes going through the scripts. There's 4 of them here. This very complex kind of concept. But at the same time, I hope you can appreciate all of the different way of manipulating data so that you can get more out of it. Where, again, this was the journal detail file, 110,000 records. I'm boiling this down to say I only have 28 journal entries that are totally unique from an account sequence point of view in my data table. So what the percentage there is like 0.00028, kind of thing. It's ridiculous. So something to definitely take a look at.